Golden State Media Concepts bring you Book Review Podcast, a haven for bookworms of all ages and the widest genres, from mystery to memoirs, romance to comedy, fantasy to sci-fi. If you love to read, this is a podcast for you. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Book Review Podcast.
GSMC Book Review Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Sarah, and as always, I am happy to be with you, to be talking about books, to be talking with an author. Today, I'm speaking with author Nancy Burke. I tried to say Burke and book at the same time. Nancy Burke, about her book, Only the Women Are Burning. And I just kind of jumped in there, didn't I? I didn't say, how are you? How's your day going? Usually I ask you at least what's going on with you. I guess I just was too excited to talk about this newest book with this latest author. But hey, how's your day going? Are you reading anything interesting? If so, I'd love to hear about it. Please tell me. I always tell you what I've been reading, and I talk to you, I talk to authors so that you can hopefully find new authors to read. But things are going okay here in my neck of the woods. I don't really live in woods. There's some hills. But things are going okay. There's some good things, there's some not so good things, kind of typical life. The one exciting thing is that I am waiting for a baby to be born. She is due soon. She is not mine, but she is the daughter of a very, very dear person in my life, and I am so excited for mom and big sister and dad and just this new baby, this new life coming into the world. She is across the country, so I won't be seeing her for a while, but very excited for her to come into the world. I feel a little better about not just like jumping in right away with what we were talking about. But again, speaking with author Nancy Burke today about her book, Only the Women Are Burning. This book is, well, remember, if you listen to the end of the last episode, I read you the quote from the back of it: a suspenseful, vivid, and convincing portrayal of the often precarious position of women in the world. And that is an excellent teaser. The book starts out, I want to say with a bang, and then I want to say it's not a slow burn, and I don't, no pun intended, actually, or maybe there is a pun intended, I'm not sure. I mean, the opening scene of the book really kind of left an impression on me, but I don't want to tell you what it is, but it does, in fact, set the tone for a lot of the themes in the book. Let me go ahead and read you the description from the back. 3 women are lost in a single morning. 1 at a commuter train, 1 at a school, 1 while walking her dog in the woods. The police think the women are making some kind of political statement by setting themselves on fire, maybe members of a cult. But Cassandra knows better. You won't rest until Cassandra, a mom and former anthropologist, solves the mystery of these fiery deaths. Part mystery, part science fiction, part a suburban domestic novel, Only the Women Are Burning asks important questions about women in contemporary suburban lives. So that is the description on the back of the book. I mentioned the opening scene, which I'm not going to tell you about. I will tell you a little bit more about the women who are described in the description on the back of the book, because it does tell you, 3 women spontaneously combust, and Cassandra, the main character, actually is standing very near one of the women, the woman at the commuter train. Cassandra is getting ready to commute to her job, and this woman just suddenly spontaneously combusts near her. So not only she's trying to solve this, she's actually stood there and witnessed this event. One of the 3 women who spontaneously combust, and then she sets out on this path to try to figure out what is going on. There are so many elements of issues that women face throughout this book. Women being believed, women's knowledge being used by men, women who have come up with the idea or done the research, and that knowledge being taken over or sublimated by men to be used to their advantage. There's issues of relationships, issues of moms that moms face every day in terms of balancing work and life and family and marriage, children, all of those things. So there are so many women's issues in here, and Nancy mentions in the interview that one of the things she feels Cassandra represents is that there's a little bit of Cassandra in every woman, that women are going to recognize at least something from Cassandra's experience, and I definitely agree with that assessment. Let's go ahead and turn to the interview with Nancy. Again, the book is called Only the Women Are Burning. The author is Nancy Burke. Hi, Nancy. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Sarah. It's great to be here.
I am very happy to have you here, and we are going to talk about your new book. It's called Only the Women Are Burning. Before we get to the book, though, if you could share a bit about yourself, that would be wonderful.
Okay, let's see. What about me? Well, I live in New Jersey, which is the setting for the book. I have lived here all my life, and let's see. What about me? I'm 65 years old. I've led a rather conventional life as a daughter, a mother, a wife, a sister, and I've always wanted to write, but I started writing later in life. And I probably started writing later because I really felt like my life was very conventional, and I never felt like I had a story to tell. But then as I kind of like started digging into writing, what I started to realize is it's not the surface level things that you really write about when you're writing a novel. It's the deeper things that are personal. And that kind of gave us a spark. I'll use the word spark with tongue in cheek for this book, particularly Only the Women Are Burning. So, I mean, that's me in a nutshell. I grew up being a little goody two-shoes girl, and as I got older, I got more curmudgeon-y, and I decided I'd stop being the good little girl and start calling some people out on some of their bad behavior, and I kind of do that through my work. It comes through the character that is the center character in Only the Women Are Burning. Cassandra is somebody who has kind of reached a place in her life where she's beginning to realize some things about her own life, and she is in a place where she wants to change things. And the thriller mystery element of the story gives her an opportunity to do that.
Yeah, there's different levels to the story, and that would be one of them. But can you give an overview of the story as a whole?
Oh, sure. Okay. Yeah. So Only the Women Are Burning is a story about Cassandra is a classic suburban stay-at-home mom, and she's raising 3 daughters, and she's on her way to the train station one morning because she has a part-time job teaching visiting school groups at a museum locally. So she gets on the train every morning and does this little part-time job and comes home. But one morning she's at the train and she's stepping up onto the train and she feels a whoosh of heat behind her. And she turns around and the woman behind her on line to get on the train has burst into flames and is burning to death. And Cassandra and the conductor are the two who are trying to be the heroines here and try to save her, and they can't save her. And so Cassandra gets drawn into the mystery of how this can, who is this woman and how can this happen to her? after she later that day finds out that it happened to two other women almost at the exact same time of the day in different parts of her town. So there's this strange phenomenon going on in the town. And in the first chapter, Cassandra realizes that the fire chief and the police officers who interview her are not really looking at her as anything more than what she looks like on the surface. And she has a whole past of a life as a scientist, as an archaeologist, as an anthropologist, and she has a whole encyclopedic mind of information that nobody has any idea that she has. And she decides that she needs to establish her own credibility, and she's going to do it by solving this mystery. And that's the surface level plot of Only the Women Are Burning. Of course, there's a lot of things going on under the surface within our Cassandra,
right?
In her personal life, in her personal life with her extended family. There's things going on in her marriage that are dissatisfying, and she is mourning a friendship. She's mourning friendships that she has lost throughout her life, and she's dealing with all of these things under the surface.
Yeah, definitely multi-layered, and it really jumps into all of that. I mean, even in the first just couple of chapters, you get this whole picture. I mean, there's this very, very horrifying but kind of quiet event when the woman on the platform. I just picture it as, this sort of quiet. I picture. I don't know why I pictured it that way, but it just, she bursts into flame and that's it. It just very quietly she dies, and it's horrible. But then you also learn that there are those family issues, and it's very obvious right away that there's going to be multiple levels to the story. So that is an introduction to Only the Women Are Burning. There is my reaction to the, like I said, horrifying but quiet. Like, it's described in this way that it just kind of happens, and it's quieter than you would expect, and projecting once again, because I can't imagine being in that situation, and I realize that Cassandra is fictional, but people witness horrifying things every day, and I just never quite know how I would react in those situations. We're going to go ahead and take our first break of the podcast. When we come back, we'll be talking about Nancy's inspiration for this particular book and this story. Stay tuned. You're listening to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I will be right back.
The GSMC Life and Happiness Podcast takes you on a journey of exploration. We'll discuss tried and true methods alongside the latest trends of how to best live your life to its fullest and happiest. From psychology to meditation, science to self-help books, the GSMC Life and Happiness Podcast will help you to discover what makes you happy and how you can live life being the best you possible. Download the GSMC Life and Happiness Podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast. I am speaking today with author Nancy Burke about her novel, Only the Women Are Burning, a novel in which 3 women spontaneously combust on the same day at the same time, and the main character, Cassandra, is trying to figure out why this has happened. So let's go ahead and return now to that interview with Nancy. What was your initial inspiration for the book?
When I myself was a young stay-at-home mom with first one daughter, and then 3 years later I had twins, so I had 3 children under the age of 3. I started a local women's group, and it was a chapter of a national organization that came out of a town in Illinois. And the name of the organization was Female. And the letters to the word female they stood for formerly employed mothers at loose ends. And it had this kind of tongue-in-cheek, poke fun at ourselves kind of feel to it, but it was like, well, here we are. We all gave up our careers to stay at home and raise our children. And so now what are we going to do? So that group was a big part of my life when I was raising my daughters. And so the background in the suburban setting of the story and some of the characters are based on, some of my experiences doing that, which lasted a very long time. But one day, the fire element came to me. I was sitting, writing in my journal, and I had just started writing short stories. I had been, working on a different novel. I was sitting writing in my journal, and it just came through my hand and through my pen and onto the page. And it was just this statement that said, the women began to spontaneously ignite as they went about their normal everyday lives in their quiet little suburban towns. And that just kind of came out of my imagination. And I just sat there under this tree and I said, where did this come from? Where did this imagery come from? And my exploration of that idea is what found its way into Only the Women Are Burning, because it was only the women who this was happening to. And that was a very, very clear plot element when the idea first came to me. So Cassandra's exploration of the phenomenon very much mirrors my own research and digging into all of the what if questions around where did that come from? How could that happen? Is that, is it a paranormal thing? Is it something that the women are doing to themselves? And it got me into this whole research phase where I was looking into women in fire throughout cultures across the world, throughout history. I mean, there are witches who are burned at the stake. We have Joan of Arc who was burned at the stake. We have stories about women in fire in like almost every culture around the world. And so I did a really, really deep dive into all of that anthropological research. I was an undergrad anthropology major way back in the day. So I had a lot of fun doing that kind of research. And, the elements of that research found its way into the book, particularly because Cassandra is teaching at a museum. And so she gets to talk to a lot of children about a lot of mythological or, ancient history kinds of subjects. And so these elements that she speculates on as what could be causing this to happen kind of work her way into her lessons or come through to her mind through the lessons that she gives as she does her job. So I had a lot of fun with the research.
I was just going to say that is fascinating that idea just popped into your head and came out of your pen through your writing, just kind of fully formed, and then you went down a rabbit hole. I can only imagine a rabbit hole of research.
I did, and I did numerous drafts of this novel because there was so much research and there was so many fascinating elements that I could include in the book that I had to pull way back on how many of them I included in the novel. Otherwise, it could have been a 1,000-page dissertation on the subject. So,
right.
So yeah, it was fun, and then it turned into science too. I looked at well, one of the elements too is when I was researching this idea, I discovered that Charles Dickens, when he wrote Bleak House back in the 1800s, he knocked off a character in Bleak House through spontaneous human combustion, which was something that he was criticized for back in England in the day. And the critics of the novel when it first came out said, why did he use that? No, everybody knows that couldn't possibly be a cause of death, that a fire, if it burns somebody, has to have happened from an external source. And his response in a later addition to the book, in his introduction, said, well, no one has ever proved that it can't happen. So I took inspiration, and I took kind of like I took a license to use this element in a modern day novel from Charles Dickens, and I thought, well, if Charles Dickens can get away with doing it in Bleak House, then I'm going to try to get away with doing it in a modern novel. So,
Nancy, if Charles Dickens jumped off a bridge, would you jump off a bridge? No, I'm kidding. I love that. That's
probably not, but
no.
But I hear you. Yes.
No, I know. I love that you took that he said that, and he, you know, he's like, well, it hasn't been not proven, so why not?
Right. And there's actually another contemporary writer who used spontaneous human combustion in a more contemporary novel, and his name is Kevin Wilson. He wrote a book called Nothing to See Here, and in the book, there's a pair of twins. They're young children, and when they get agitated, their skin bursts into flames, and their caregiver has to talk them out of their agitation so that their bodies will stop burning. And
wow.
When I was, you know, when I had finished, writing this book, I found him when I was looking for a book to read on audible.com. And I was like, oh my God, there's another crazy person out here in contemporary literature and contemporary fiction writing and using the same thing. So,
interesting.
So that also gave me confidence.
Right. Yeah. Talk a little bit more about Cassandra as the main character. My first question is, you know, she does teach mythology at a museum to children. Is that kind of where her name came from as well?
Yes, that is where her name came from. Cassandra is a character from ancient Greek mythology. She was a priestess of Apollo, and she was much favored by Apollo, and so he gave her the gift of sight so she could see into the future. But then when she rebuked him or rejected his sexual advances, he was angry, and so he put a curse on her. And her curse was that she would still have the gift of sight, but no one would ever believe a word she said. And that was the curse. And so she led this life of being able to see and know things and not have anybody ever listen to her. And when I was naming my protagonist in this story, I said, that's what Cassandra as a modern day, stay-at-home mother, raising 3 kids with a husband who was always traveling for business, and she has given up all of her own career aspirations to be back at home. And there's a really strong reason why she did that, which I won't reveal in this interview because I don't want to give it away to the readers. But she feels like no one is listening to her, and she feels like she is sitting on a wealth of knowledge that is very valuable, but nobody takes her seriously. And so I felt like that was the perfect name for her.
I agree. And
Cassandra also had a brother named Helenus, who also had the gift of sight back in ancient Greece, but everybody believed him. So I have another character in the story who is somewhat the Helenus to her Cassandra.
Yes.
The reporter character in the story who she befriends, who she finds kind of a bond with. He kind of is her Helenus character in the story.
Yes, so remember Cassandra and Helenus, and one being believed, one not being believed, because that's going to come back up when we come back from this break. You're listening to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I will be right back.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast. As a reminder, before the break, Nancy was speaking about Cassandra's namesake, the protagonist's namesake, how Cassandra was a seer, no one believed her, that she had a brother who was also a seer. People did believe him. And so just a reminder that that's what we were talking about right before the break, and that leads into this next comment.
And of course, there's all the layers of sexism and misogyny in there, where the man is believed, where the woman is not, etc.
Which is one of the really, really great reasons why I'm so happy that we're doing this interview in March, which is Women's History Month.
Yes.
Because attention this month, I mean, we're almost at the end of the month, but there's a lot of attention this month about women's history, and there is a lot of attention being paid to women's voices and women finally getting a chance to be heard and be taken seriously. Women are calling the patriarchy out on that habit of dismissing women for being women.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, I mean, there's so many examples throughout history of women making discoveries and not being acknowledged for those discoveries.
Absolutely.
So, what about Cassandra do you think will resonate the most with readers?
What I think will resonate most about her is there's a part of her in every woman. She is leading a fairly ordinary, conventional life, but she's deeper than what the surface shows. And in this book, Cassandra is not a victim of the things that she sees around her that infuriate her or drive her to, it kind of drives her to be even more determined to do what she sets out to do. When what I want women to see is that women don't have to give up their dreams when they're doing so much in their lives for everybody else, fulfilling their role as daughter, sister, mother, wife. Especially right now during the pandemic, women, I've read in the news and I've seen it in my life that women are bearing a lot of the burden of family care, home care, giving up work because the children are home from school, that, women are finding it necessary to let go of the outlets for their own passionate expression of their own abilities. And Cassandra had done that, but she's finding her way back. And I really want Cassandra to be inspiration to women to hold on to their own dreams, hold on to the things that are their capabilities and their passions, because there will become a time in their life when they will come up on the top of your to-do list, and you will regain the energy, the time, the bandwidth to finish doing those things that you've always dreamed about doing.
Exactly, and I think it is an interesting point that you bring up, that we are talking about this not only in Women's History Month, but during a pandemic when things have changed so drastically and roles have shifted to accommodate homeschooling or distance learning, quarantine, all of those things. There's just so much shifting so fast, I think, in the last year, and it's going to be a while before we realize all of the ramifications of those shifts.
Yes, it's going to be a long road back. We just have to have faith that there is a road back.
Yes.
And launching, I do have to say too, that launching a book in a pandemic year has also been a challenge.
I've heard that many times.
Yes, authors can't do live events. I've had to basically get the word out about this book, and my publisher have had to get the word out about this book completely on social media, online, through everything is done virtually. So it's that's been a new and unexpected journey as well.
Absolutely, but just think of how much easier it will be next time when you can, well, maybe it won't be easier, but it will be slightly more normal when you can actually go out and talk to people in person.
Yes, I mean, my local bookstore, Watchung Booksellers in Montclair, is always so fabulous with writers, and even local writers who are not the big name writers, always hosting us for signing events and book discussions. And she still did that for me and for several other writers in town this year, but it was all done virtually.
Right.
But the idea of just being able to be face-to-face in a room with people and sign the book yourself instead of just sending out signed book plates, it's just so much more. It's just so much more human to be face-to-face with your readers. I mean, writers spend an awful lot of time alone, and when you have to launch your book when you're sitting in your house alone as well, it's like, oh, just want to be face-to-face with some people, just like we all feel every day when we're doing business meetings on Zoom.
Exactly. I can imagine it would feel a little, well, definitely isolating, but also maybe a little surreal. I mean, you wrote the book at home, you wrote the book. It was not a team effort, and then you're doing these virtual events, almost like you're in a vacuum in some ways. I just imagine it feels a little surreal.
It does. It just feels like, hello, is anybody out there? Is anything real?
Mm-hmm. Well, you've mentioned a couple of things about the book that are autobiographical, such as the setting and the fact that Cassandra has 3 daughters, 2 of whom are twins. You have 3 daughters, 2 of whom are twins. Are there other autobiographical elements in the book?
Well, there are. I think every fiction writer pulls on people and characters and circumstances from their lives, and the relationship between Cassandra and her friend who she loses resonated. It came out of a friendship that I had a very long time ago when I mentioned that female group that I did back when the kids were young. I had a very dear friend, and actually her name was Cindy. I didn't even change her name in the book. And there have been philosophical differences between her and me that have curtailed that friendship. And there's a lot of regret in life when that kind of thing happens, when somebody is a very close friend at one point in your life and then suddenly they're not anymore because there's an insurmountable barrier to you ever becoming friends again. And that definitely is an autobiographical element. And the other thing too, when I was getting this book ready for publication, I lost a really, really dear friend. She died a few days after the book was released by the publisher. And back in the summer, I decided that I was going to dedicate the book to her. And she was fighting pancreatic cancer, and she lost her fight with that in early October, just as my book was emerging. And there are women who die in this book, but I guess what I really want to make clear is that this book is not just about women dying, because we all have people who we lose. We all have people we lose a lot of different ways, to death and loss of friendship and many other ways. But this book really is about women's lives. It's about what we do. It's about the choices we make. It's about the little twists and turns that we confront as we go from, like, for example, Cassandra, as a college student, has to make certain decisions in her life because of things that happened to her. And at the time, the decision is the only decision that can be made. But what happens is over time, you make the decision again, and then you make the decision again. And then little by little, you end up with this slippery slope of how much have you let go of because at the moments of all of those pivotal, decisions, you made the right decision for the right reasons. But you find out at the end that you've lost something along that way, and there's a road back to recovering those elements that you've let go of at those times. So that's an autobiographical element in the abstract.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I'm trying to come up with a maybe it's a new genre. I don't know. It's sort of a thriller, but not in the way we often think about thrillers. I mean, it's not that kind of action, sort of psychological, but it is psychological in that there's so much going on with all of the things that you were just talking about in terms of Cassandra's life and her relationships and her past, and everything's kind of coming up, and she's sorting through it as she's sorting through the mystery. And I just feel like we need a genre for emotional thrillers, maybe. I don't know. But there's so much going on with her.
Yes, and there was a woman who wrote in the New York Times book review section, this is going back a year, probably a little bit longer than a year. She coined the phrase women's rage fiction. And she suggested that is a new genre for women's fiction. And she mentioned a couple of books like Girl on the Train. I'm trying to think of some other ones off the top of my head. But there's a book that Helen Phillips wrote called The Need. And it's kind of a fabulous, fantastical, psychological journey that the character goes on. But the genre called women's rage fiction just seemed to just fit for my book and for her book and for books like Girl on the Train, where women are just kind of reckoning with, this is not the way it's supposed to be. This is enraging me in a slow, smoldering way. And it's coming out in the characters in these books. And it's not like a revenge thing, like, if you look back at Stephen King's first novel, Carrie, where, the Carrie is treated horribly by her high school teammates and she gets this revenge at this prom. But it's, what do women do in a healthy way so that they can recover and survive their indignation at the way certain things happen in the world? And it's women's rage. It's part of the Me Too movement. And that's what I think is the genre that you can fit this into. Yes, there are fabulous elements in my book, also in The Need, but they somehow serve as metaphors for what women are really feeling way, way deep down under the surface.
Women are literally spontaneously combusting. I mean, if that's not a metaphor, I don't know what it is.
Absolutely. And, it's so funny because when I would meet up with friends, we'd go for a walk or have a girls' night out or whatever, and somebody would say, Nancy, what are you working on right now? And I would say, I'm writing a book about women who burst into flames and disappear in the middle of their lives as they're just walking through their normal routines. And usually a friend will drop her wine glass on the table or her fork and say, oh my God, I can so identify with that feeling. And I say, see, that's why I'm writing it.
That's why, exactly.
It's like, I feel you, girl,
Jumping in here so we can take our final break of the podcast, but I will say women's rage might be a new genre, but it's certainly not a new concept. Not by a long shot. So let's go ahead and take that final break of the podcast. Stay tuned. You're listening to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I'll be right back.
The Golden State Media Concepts Travel Podcast, the show that gives you advice on everything travel. We explore places you've always wanted to go, as well as giving tips for traveling in those places. We'll give you advice on the best sites for travel tips, information, and discounts. Join us as we travel the world, explore cultures, and meet new people. The Golden State Media Concepts Travel Podcast has got you covered. Download the GSMC Travel Podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast and my interview with author Nancy Burke. We are talking about her new novel, Only the Women Are Burning. Let's go ahead and get back to that interview.
Are you drawn to a particular kind of writing? Do you like this sort of, are you drawn to writing women's rage fiction, or are you drawn to kind of the mystery aspect of the novel? What types of writing tend to draw your interest?
Yeah, I mean, I don't really have a specific genre. I kind of go with what is inspiring me at the moment. I mean, my first two books were not like this one at all. My first two books were actually, the first one was fiction, and it was a refugee story. And it was steeped in research about the country of Chile in the 1970s when the military takeover of Salvador Allende's government happened. And the element for that book was a little incident that happened with my daughter when she was 7 years old and she was trying to learn how to ride a bicycle, and she was terrified of her bike. And a woman in my neighborhood came over and she handed her this little old, tiny little red cobweb-covered bike and said, "Melissa, this is a magic bike. Anyone who tries to ride this bike can ride it." And the suggestion, the power of suggestion, got my daughter up and riding that thing in 2 days after she was terrified to ride the one that she owned. So that spark of an older mom knowing this and creating that little spark of belief in my daughter's mind is what triggered that book. And then I went and looked for a place around the world to choose as a setting, because I didn't think this magic realism idea was going to play in a suburban New Jersey town, which is what I was familiar with. My second book kind of, it kind of grew on, my first book was a refugee story, and my second book was a true story, nonfiction, based on a series of interviews I did with a woman who was a child in Estonia during World War II, and how she and her single mother escaped from first the Soviets as they took over her tiny little country. Then the Germans came in and took over the country. And then the Soviets came in and pushed the Germans out. And then Estonia became part of the Soviet Union for the next 50 years. And it was her personal journey that intrigued me, that I felt the world needed to hear this story, because it was another side of that era that we don't typically learn about in our history books. Because she actually escaped into Nazi-occupied lands to escape the Soviets and Stalin's, his reign of terror. So my books just kind of come from, the universe just speaks to me, and then I do a deep dive into the subject, and it just kind of captures me.
Yeah.
So I don't it's like the story chooses me. It sounds kind of strange, but they do.
That's what it sounds like to me. You said earlier that you came to writing a little later in life. What prompted you to sit down and actually start writing?
That's a really good question. I mean, I always imagined that someday I would write a book. I was always an avid reader when I was a child and all through, my high school and college years. My mom was a big reader. My grandfather was, I think he read every book in the public library that was near his house when he was retired. But I started writing the year, and this is strange, and I really can't explain why this happened, but it was the year my dad passed away. My dad passed away young. He was not well, and he died in 1995. And that was the year that I just started writing things down. And I had an interview the other day. We did an author-to-author talk with another woman from my publisher. And we both mentioned that we both started writing in the year that our fathers passed away. So neither one of us could definitively explain why that was the year that we started, or that was the catalyst that made us start. But I was thinking, maybe it's because we recognize when we lose somebody young, which my father was very young, we recognize the shortness of life. And if you want to do something, don't wait. Do it now. And so I started writing.
Interesting that you both had similar experiences. I suppose it does make sense from the standpoint of losing someone and not wanting to waste time or miss out on an opportunity. From your own journey into writing, do you have advice for aspiring authors?
Yes, authors. We always have advice for aspiring writers. And my very, very basic piece of advice to writers who really, really have a story to tell is, first and foremost, set aside time in your life every day. Accept that it's important to yourself, even if the rest of the world just kind of thinks it's a self-indulgent, oh, isn't that nice? You think you can be a writer kind of thing. Set aside time for yourself every day. Sit down at the desk or the table or the computer or at the coffee shop and spend an hour and a half, as much time as you can put on your calendar to make an appointment with yourself to do that, and just write. And don't worry about craft. Just write what you're thinking. And eventually you'll start to realize that there's a motivation under all of this. There's something that you want to say, and that will crystallize. And then around that something that you want to say will come your story. It might start with a character. It might start with an idea. It might start with a setting. But all of these things are important elements of the book, and just be patient with yourself. And if you really, really care about it, do it, and don't care that the rest of the world can go by without your book, without your short story, without your memoir, because it's really about yourself and what it is that you have to say to yourself. And maybe you will have readers someday, but do it for yourself.
When you take the time to read for yourself rather than maybe for research, what authors and genres are you drawn to?
I primarily write. I probably primarily read fiction if I'm not researching. It's always fiction. And my favorites tend to change here and there. But if I had to tell you a list of authors who have totally influenced me, I would start with Margaret Atwood. And not necessarily, and of course, The Handmaid's Tale I read many, many years ago before they made it into the fabulous series on Hulu. But she also wrote The Cat's Eye, which was a wonderful book that was inspiring. So I love Margaret Atwood. Flannery O'Connor is my classic influence. She's a Catholic writer who lived in the South, the Protestant South, and she has a wicked, wicked sense of humor and just pokes fun at the hypocrisy that she sees all around her in the world that she was basically imprisoned in because she was an invalid with lupus when she did all of her writing. So Flannery O'Connor, Margaret Atwood, and I have to say Toni Morrison's work, Beloved, really, really resonated with me. And I think it's because of what these writers do is they don't just write to entertain. They write because they want to reveal some kind of truth to us that is whispering to them, and they're trying to reveal it through their fiction. And so while they're wonderful stories, there's a subtext. And and most of these people have a really important subtext that they're trying to open the eyes of the world to something that we might not see under the surface.
Mm-hmm. And I would say that there's definitely elements of that women's rage within each of those authors.
Oh, absolutely, yes. And and for fun, I love reading Kevin Wilson. Now that I've discovered him, my fellow spontaneous human combustion writer, I've read all of his work since I discovered him last year, and I just read The Midnight Library by Matt Haig, which is a wonderful book. And another one is Alice Hoffman. And I think the first one of hers that I read was Practical Magic. And then I just went from there and kind of like went through all of her books, because they're all about mothers and sisters. Because they all have kind of like a similar premise, but they're also very, very different from each other. And I love them. I'm a sister of 4 other sisters and 2 brothers, and so family relationships are always they're always fascinating for me.
Yeah, absolutely. Where can people find you on the internet? Do you have a website, and also do you have any social media people could connect with you on?
Well, absolutely, yes. I have a website, and the website is www.nancyburkestories.com. You can find me on Facebook. I have an author page, again, with my name, Nancy Burke, author, on Facebook. On Instagram, I am Nancy Burke 21. And let's see, is there any? I think I'm on Twitter as Nancy Burke 21 also. But I'm primarily on Facebook and Instagram. I don't do Twitter that much. So
All
yes,
right.
And if anybody ever wanted to get in touch with me, there is a contact page on my website. I love to talk to readers. I would do book groups remotely. You can call me in on a virtual book group meeting, or anything like that, because I love to talk to readers.
All right.
So there you
Thank
go.
you so much.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you. Well, Nancy, we've talked about a variety of different topics today, but is there anything that we haven't covered that you wanted to mention, especially about the book Only the Women Are Burning?
Well, I'm going to give a shout out to the girl at Loyola University who was taking a book design class and designed my book cover.
Yes, thank you, because I meant to ask you that.
Yeah, she was a student. I mean, Apprentice House Press is part of the undergraduate English department at Loyola University, where the faculty and the students actually work on a publishing concentration within their English major. And so Taylor Fleur was assigned in her book design class to my book, and she did an absolutely fabulous job with the cover, so much so that Apprentice House Press nominated her for a book cover design award, much to my delight, because I thought she was fabulous to work with. She was an undergrad student, and she did a wonderful, wonderful job on my cover. So lots of gratitude right there.
Yeah, she did. I love the cover.
Yeah, she found that flaming silhouette. I was just like, wow. And she sent me the first cover. I just was like, wow, she did it. She captured it. So, ladies, be careful while you're out there wandering through your everyday life.
Yes.
Watch out for the rage.
Right.
And much luck to everyone, and happiness and health.
All right. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to me today about Only the Women Are Burning and your other books and thoughts on writing. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Oh, it was wonderful. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you again to Nancy for joining me to talk about the novel Only the Women Are Burning, to do so with such eloquence in terms of a lot of women's issues that are addressed in the book, and that many most all women will recognize if they were to read the book, talking to me about women's rage as a genre. I tried to say rage and genre at the same time. It came out rage. Women's rage as a genre, which again may or may not be a new thing. It's not a new thing, but it could be a new genre. So thank you so much to Nancy. If you are a fan of, well, as it says on the back, part mystery, part science fiction, part suburban domestic novel, all women's rage genre, then you should definitely check out Only the Women Are Burning. It's an interesting ride, and you'll be with Cassandra every step of the way, so definitely check that out. I hope you will also check out my next interview on the next episode. Next time I am speaking with author Danny Gardner about his book, Ace Boone Coon. It's the second book in his Elliot Caprice mystery series. So we are now turning to historical fiction and mystery. This one is set in the 1950s in Illinois, and so join me for that conversation with Danny Gardner. Again, it's Ace Boone Coon, second book in his Elliot Caprice series. Thank you so much, as always, for joining me. I greatly appreciate all of you. I hope that you enjoy these author interviews. If you do, and you're a fan of the podcast, please do me the great favor of giving us a review, whether written or just clicking one of those stars. 5 would be awesome, but I'm not going to tell you what to do. If you could give us a review, that really helps us to get the podcast out. Write a review, click subscribe, follow us on social media. You can find this podcast on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Hit me up with what you're reading. I would love to hear from you. Tell me if you've read some of the authors I'm talking to. All of those good things. I would love to have some book talk with you, where it's not just me sitting in front of the microphone talking to you and you listening, but engage me on social media. I would love that. In the meantime, hope you're having a wonderful day. Hope, as always, that day has involved plenty of time to get yourself lost in a good book.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Book Review Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.